to be a partner with all of you in helping to learn from you and to be able to discuss some of these challenges and how we might be able to solve them.
Thank you, Wendy. And I come to this work as a lifelong educator, nonprofit leader, and expert in this work, as someone who was a victim of gun violence and also a justice engaged student who has been able to do a lot of good work in our community. And so, Beric, if you want to go ahead and start the slides, we'll go ahead and get started. Appreciate you. And so, as Wendy alluded to, we have been working on an initiative for the last 3 years or so, the Justice Engaged Students of Colorado. And essentially, this is the work that we've been leading through some support that we received from the Attorney General's grant. And so for us, this is really about creating systems level change to generate equitable outcomes for all students in Colorado. And we'll go to the next slide there. And just for some context, I think it's important for us to lay the stage so then you understand then why the need of the work. And some of this might be information you all know, but just to give it to, just to refresh everyone's mind and thoughts and ideas in this, when we think about the school to prison pipeline, we know that the research shows that it's disproportionate. We know that those that end up in the criminal justice system are disproportionate. We know the numbers that are representative of that in terms of the population in the United States versus that of the world's population. But what you may not know, and in particular in the system overall regarding children, is that 60% of those that are incarcerated or justice engaged are children of color, 41% Black and 21% Hispanic and 5% overall. Those numbers also start to mirror the same numbers as they go into the adult prison system and incarcerated as adults. And so what we are really looking forward and hope to do is create this solution and this intervention, which is an interceptor to the problem. We'll go to the next slide. You know, for many of us and in the work that you all do, we know that there is an intersectionality between mental health, addiction, and justice engagement. The research states and shows that substance abuse and addiction presents itself as a growing intersectionality for our youth. 67% of our youth have co-occurring treatment needs, and this means 2 or more needs are situations that are taking place in their lives. It could be homelessness, mental health, a form of substance abuse. And when those start to manifest, they only grow. And so 84% of youth have a form of mental health, need a form of mental health intervention, and 78% require a level of treatment of services. That then negates and goes back to the total number of about 20% of those that are justice engaged will be successful. And so when we think about that number, 20%, there is a good place for us to be able to do some work, and we hope that this is a solution. We'll go to the next slide. When we think about this number in terms of the Colorado context, I really want you all to be able to just kind of sit on this for a moment. Overall, there's about 6,300 students who became justice engaged in 2021. That represents the size of Adams 14 or a large rural district in Montrose. When we think about justice engaged students with an ongoing system involvement, that's about 15,500. In totality, that represents about 22,000 students, or about 20,000 if depending on where the numbers might land. That's the size of Golden. And we all know that if there was a city or a municipality like the size of Golden, which represents the 30th largest town for our state, we would be standing in the gap because we would be identifying the crisis, finding solutions, and ensuring equitable outcomes for that particular city. And so again, how you see here on the bottom, only 20% of those educated students go on to earn a diploma. When we think about those numbers in terms of a tax revenue, yeah, go ahead and you go to the next slide, Beck. When we think about those numbers in regards to a tax revenue, what we've described is the social impact of students not being able to go to school and complete school. But of those 22,000 students, if they were able to go on and actually complete school and be a positive generating economic revenue for the state of Colorado, we're losing about $110 million in tax revenue. And so this is the roadmap and the solution. And this is what we're really looking for your thoughts and feedback and concerns on as we go into this conversation. It's best for me to be able to illustrate to you the roadmap and the justice engaged journey of a student through this illustration. For many of our students and many that you might work with, we understand that students of color have a high number of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. My ACEs score was 10. It probably was 20 or 30 based upon all of the things that I had. And so for those students, they are already dealing with small roadblocks in their life. And then when they become justice engaged, as we see here where the disruption rock represents, there's a disruption in their formal education process. When that disruption happens, there are a lot of things that go into place? How do I get back to school? Will the school accept me? Is this a component of probation? Who do I call to get back into school? I've now been out of school for 3 months, and will they allow me back in? Missed October count. Our hope is to create a hotline. This hotline then will be an opportunity in place where all of us would be able to contact judges, lawyers, probation officers, teachers, educators, parents, tios, abuelitas, to find resources to be able to help their student, their just engaged student, get re-engaged back into the process. The red box, the blue box, the orange, and the green box illustrate the opportunities and spaces in which what we are proposing as the Justice Student Bill of Rights would stand in the gap and fill in that need. One, in the red box, once there's a disruption, there should be clear explanation of how the credits are obtained, either in incarceration or non-incarceration or alternative school. How would they transfer? And creating a codified system for them to be able to get back into graduation and a graduation plan. Once they've been reintegrated back to school, we all know that we just can't put the students back into school. We want to ensure that all students in school are safe. And we also need to recognize that there is a spectrum of when we think about justice engaged students. Myself, when I was 14 years old and my mother was addicted to crack cocaine and I was homeless, I needed to eat. And so when I went to eat and get food because we were homeless, that was a form of justice engagement. Versus there are also students that create violent assaults that are on the other end of the spectrum. And so I want us to be mindful of that illustration, that not all justice engaged students are violent. Some of justice engagement is due to societal ills, pressures, and other sorts of variables that might be taking place in their life. So when they return to school, the Justice Student Engaged Bill of Rights is designed to help support and create support systems for them to be successful. This means creating clear explanations, having it documented on the website or in the school district of who the point person is, ensuring that there is a process and codified system within 1 to 3 days of ensuring that there's a phone call back to that family or that student and they're able to obtain re-entry back into that school, the MTSS support or any social emotional development support that goes in there. While in school, this is an important piece where the teacher and counselors and everyone is informed of how best to support this student. Not looking at this student as a student that is less than or has deficits, but a student that has encountered a situation and disruption in their educational break, but it's our responsibility and theirs to ensure that they have a successful completion. While in school, part of what we are proposing with the Justice Student Bill of Rights is that the students would be able to receive a navigator and supports, and those supports then that would lead them to mental health supports, if it's tutoring and emotional or monetary supports, and ensuring that they are able to then have a successful pathway to completing high school, as you see in the orange box. Now, in order to complete high school, we know that there has to be graduation plans, attainment, opportunities, but most importantly, the conversation with that, and then an opportunity for them to be able to move forward. This roadmap that we provided to you comes from what we call an education journey map, where a lot of our young students and young people that we work with have described and talked about their breaks in education, our spaces and places and moments. This illustration really becomes the definite and the defining moment for a solution in the sliver of ending and being a part of ending the school to prison pipeline, but most importantly, understanding that this is one solution of many, many solutions to one problem. And so we see this component and this sliver has been able to answer those components and those pieces. Next slide. And so what we want to do, and we can share that slide with you as well, and in some of the information that is being shared, we want to break you all up into a couple of different groups, depending on how many individuals are here. And Barrick, we have another individual here with us. Kirk, if there's more than 20 or 40 individuals, and if not, then we can split them, as you said. Yep. But we're going to pose those two questions to you that we love for you to think about and to be able to answer in terms of what this presentation, but most importantly, what do you think are those pieces? And so the questions are, in your experience, personal and professional, how have roadblocks to an education disrupted the lives of young people, such as homelessness, justice engagement, mental health, and socioeconomic situations? And then the second question we'd love for you to ponder in your small groups is, how would you help justice engaged student navigate reentry or continuation of academic attainment in their role in the school or community closest to you? We're asking these particular questions because we're really interested in knowing what is out there, what supports are there, or what information do individuals know. And so thank you so much for putting the questions, Barrick, into the chat. At this point, we'll go ahead and go into the small groups.
me
And then
just
when we come
one
back, we'll come
second.
into the larger group and we'll open up for more dialogue and questions. Unless there are some pressing questions that anyone has now, I would love to hear what you might have.
Yeah, and actually, Jose, I'm going to kind of move us along. That was an incredible job getting through a lot of information. We're going to go into 2 breakout groups. We're going to have our friends here from JESCO will really be facilitating. The PEBC and Confluence team is there to support. I dropped the questions in the chat. The other thing I'm going to do is drop into the chat a Jamboard. You guys know we use these at all of our meetings until Google stops them on me at the end of this year. I'm going to ask our facilitators not to share screen and put that up. I'm dropping that link so folks after today's meeting can continue to add thoughts and ideas there. But Carrie, if you could send us into our breakout groups, we're going to go in our breakout groups for 15 minutes, and then we'll come back for about 5 or 10 minutes of group discussion. It's 3:46. Why don't we actually plan to come back at 4:05 promptly? And with that, we'll go into these breakout groups.
Appreciate you, Beck. Thank you so much. So as we're preparing to go to those breakout groups, Wendy will be in one, I'll be in one as well, and we'll have Kirk with us. So we'd love
Zach.
to hear this. And Zach as well. I did see Zach, yes.
And I want to, both thank Wendy and apologize for rushing through. We want to make sure we get to this other conversation. As I said before we went into the breakout, though, I'm going to leave that Jamboard up and in place. If anybody wants to add some more thoughts, either during today's call or following it, I'll get that over to Amy and Dr. Silva. So feel free to use that Jamboard as we go forward. I'm going to hold, we literally have 4 minutes before I've got to move us into our next panel. So if anybody wants to use the raise your hand, if you've got either a reflection, a question, or a comment you want to share while we still have the JESCO team, feel free to raise your hand and we'll get you in here. Okay, I don't see any hands popping up. If I missed you, I do apologize. There's nothing showing. Dr. Silva, Wendy, the entire JESCO and Generation School Network team, thank you very much for joining us, but also for all the work that you do here and elsewhere. We so appreciate your time and educating us. And as your work continues and you look at the Student Bill of Rights, know that we're a resource here and a sounding board for all of you. And we'll look to re-engage with you in the new year as things move forward. With that, though, I do want to move us into our second conversation, which Evan and Jamita are going to lead. And this was something that several of our CSSI members had specifically requested, was to start understanding what's happening with alternative placements and alternative schools. And as I said at the top, we're going to have probably a 2, if not 3-part conversation here. We think it's really important that people understand this from multiple perspectives. From what is the process or the procedures or the protocols that lead to a student being moved into an alternative environment? What are the standards or protocols for that? What are some of those different alternative schools, which can mean a lot of things, as you're going to hear in this panel. And then certainly we want to continue to focus. This group is focused on school safety. And that's, as you know, from our time over the last year, is a broad definition. We mean the well-being of all of our kids. So we want to make sure that as we have this alternative placement or alternative school conversation, we're talking, yes, about the students that will stay back in that other school and their safety, but we want to make sure that we're talking about the physical, the mental, and the career and future safety and well-being of all students, including those being placed in another environment. So with that, Evan, I'm going to just briefly put up on the screen the panel that you guys have assembled, and then I'll take that down and let Carrie highlight everybody so we can get into the conversation.
Thanks, Barrick. Yeah, so we've got, these are our panelists. We're gonna get them pinned up on everybody's screen and have them introduce themselves here in a minute. Barrick, thanks for that overview. Similar to the last conversation with our friends at Generation Schools, we're gonna have an opportunity. We're probably gonna stay in one full big group for a debrief here, but we'll drop a link to a Jamboard. We know there's a lot of smart people that are here in this room, and as Barrick alluded to, we envision this as definitely as a multi-part conversation. So we're really gonna lean on you all to help us help us continue to get smarter in this area and really use that Jamboard to collect additional information or questions that you may have about alternative placements and school safety that can help us go deeper in future conversations. All right. So with that said, we're going to start things off here with our wonderful friends who've joined us here from the panel. I see that we're all up on our screen here, so I'm just really going to have everybody just go around and introduce themselves. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your context, so sort of where the school, the community you're working with, student populations, anything that you feel is relevant. And I'll start with James, if you don't want to come off mute and say hello.
Hi, I'm James. Nice to see everybody here today. So I work at the Joshua School as one of the school directors. It's a newly formed facility school program through the Colorado Department of Education. We just got our license back in August. So it's been like quite an interesting journey so far, but we work predominantly with kindergarten through 5th grade. We do have one pre-K student, so pre-K through 5th grade.
Thanks, James. Thanks again for taking some time to join us. Maureen, I'll have you go next if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Maureen Welch, and I'm a recovering general ed and special ed teacher. I taught in Denver and in Aurora, and now I run an online community which empowers families and providers with information so that they can successfully advocate for disability services. And I have been deeply involved in the facility school work group. So that's sort of the perspective I bring here today. And that was a committee that some legislation formed at CDE.
Thanks, Maureen, and thanks again for joining us. All right. Pat, you are last but certainly not least. I can see where you're from in your name on your Zoom screen there. Why don't you give everyone a little bit more about yourself?
Pat Bershinsky, Executive Director of the Pikes Peak BOCES. BOCES, as you guys probably all know, we're all things SPED in rural Colorado, all rural districts. What makes my organization a little different from the rest of the BOCES is we run a special needs school for about 125 kids that are placed there according to their IEP. So I guess that's why I'm on here.
All right. Well, thanks very much for the introduction, Pat. My next question is going to be from everybody, and I think for the sake of simplicity, I might just reverse the order that I asked folks to share. We'd love to just hear everybody share their perspective, and really, maybe in sort of a short version that you can do it so that we can give everybody enough time to speak. How do you define an alternative placement school or option, and what is the purpose to you? And Pat, I'm going to reverse the order, so I'll have you go first. I'll go through that way.
So the question is, how do I define the school?
Yeah, how do you define what an alternative placement school or option is, and what is the purpose?
And what is the what?
Purpose.
For our School of Excellence, it's a school where the kid needs special supports. Maybe in a school district, we're not a facility school. We're an extension of about 23 different school districts. And so for us, when my IEP team comes together with a referral from a school district, the IEP teams work together to decide if that's the LRP or the LRE for that kid. If that's the decision, then through a process of handing the kids off with us, maybe they send a team, transition them into my school, and then we start the educational process. So the need, I guess, was the question. In our area, Pikes Peak region, the need is growing every day, right? We can't, we're out of space right now. 125 kids is max for us. So I'm sitting in my school in Calhoun, Colorado right now. We bought another school building out here just to expand. And then the goal is always to work with the kid, educate the kid, get them back to their home district. So that's what we do.
Yeah, thanks so much. Could you, when you and I spoke before this call, you were, just the scope of the geographic size of the region that your BOCES serve. Could you, I was wondering if you sharing a little bit more about you said the number of districts, but sort of like, what does that look like as far as a scale of size is where folks are coming from? for your BOCES? That just might help
Uh,
just with context.
We stretch south into D60, Pueblo to Canyon City, Cripple Creek, Victor, all the schools in between, and then D38 Lewis Palmer. When I was able to purchase this building out here in Cowhan, which is more rural, then we opened up to East Central BOCES, the Lyman folks. And so Lyman now has a placement area outside of busing a kid 2.5 hours to Denver every day. So we have several kids here that have been on a bus at least 2 hours a day since pre-K to get to whatever facility. And so this created an alternative for those folks as well to be able to have a closer place to have their kids. And then it comes equipped with, all the staff. Well, I can't say all the staff because I'm sure we're like everybody else. You can't find anybody that wants to work, but the BCBAs, the psychs, the social workers, the whole ball of wax. So send about 25% of the kids back at Christmas time is kind of what we look at, and then about 25% in May, and then it starts all over again in August. So there's always a slot. So once a kid goes back, we've gotten to the point now that we stay so full we have to sell slots. Once that kid goes back to their home district, there's a kid waiting in the slots filled the next day. So we're not going out of business anytime soon.
I really appreciate you sharing a little bit more about your work and the kind of the scope and the span of it there, Pat. So thank you so much. Maureen, I'm going to transition over to you and go back. I'll do a reminder of that original question here, which is, thinking about your work and your context and your experience, how do you define an alternative placement or option and its purpose?
Well, regarding the students that I work with disabilities, they have a federal and a state, right to getting a free and appropriate public education. So to me, a placement may be out of their homeschool to get that free and appropriate public education. So that's within my wheelhouse. There are currently 30 facility schools in Colorado, but the need is 2 to 3 times as much as that. So I think as our presenter right before me said, or panelist before me said, there's much greater need than there are slots, which means many kids that are being pushed out of their schools because their needs aren't getting met are at home and they're not getting educational services that are free and public education. So I'm greatly concerned that there's not enough for the amount of need that's out there.
All right. Thank you so much, James. I'm gonna go over to you and have you share your thought as someone who you said you were a director or assistant director at the facility school.
Director,
Director,
one
okay.
of the directors. There's two over the school, so I'm one of them. But yeah, I don't really have much different from what the other two panelists have already said. But I think all that I would add, it's usually the facility school that we operate works really closely with districts in order to have the districts appropriately place students, knowing what the students' level and needs are and what our programming offerings are. I would say that it's usually just kind of what was touched on earlier. It's just goes back to the least restrictive environment and free and appropriate public education. It just gets to a point where school districts simply just doesn't have the access to the appropriate amount of resources or to the appropriate personnel to where they're able to appropriately meet the students' needs and their learning needs. And so that's how we often get referrals for students to join our facility school programs. We work with students that are highly impacted by autism. So they usually stay with us for quite some time. However, we do try to work pretty actively to sort of remediate some of these needs so that they are able to eventually transition back into a public education setting. Just because what was said earlier, the ultimate goal is to ensure that they're getting access to free and appropriate public education, which means making sure that they have access to their community and their typical peers. And sometimes a facility school just doesn't do that. It takes them away from those things. And so it is like a constant effort is to ensure that we are trying to make moves to get them back into those appropriate settings and like work ourselves out of a job, so to speak, even though the job will never be worked out of.
I certainly appreciate that perspective. Thank you so much, James, and everyone. I'm actually going to pass the mic over to Jamita. She's got a couple of more questions for y'all before we open it up to a group chat.
Yeah, thank you, Evan and James. It's like I planted you to kind of lead into the next question. Appreciate that. Can you all speak more about the process around entry into your schools or into the different facility schools and alternative placement schools, but then also what the re-entry process might look like for a student to go into a more traditional school? And I'm going to start with you, Pat. Oh, you're muted.
I'm not very technologically advanced here, as you can tell. So, our school, I don't know how, in comparison to facility schools, because we aren't. We work in a partnership with all the school districts, all 23 of them, and so it's a referral process. And depending on what the kids' needs are or what's going on in their district, they're referred to my IEP team. And then the district, the sending district, will meet with my IEP team and they'll formulate a plan for the kid. And it's all based around LRE, right? And so if the decision is made and with any IEP that the kid comes to my facility, like I say, they couldn't send, and it depends on the age of the kid, right? We're pre-K through 12. So a lot of the younger kids, they'll pass off with a team of theirs. Maybe their pairs that the kids have worked with for a while or whatever will come into my building and maybe for a week or two transition that kid to my pairs. And then the same thing going back when the decision, we compile so much data and track so much data, whether it's meeting IEP goals, behavior goals, whatever it might, educational goals. Once that kid starts to hit those benchmarks, the IEP teams convene again, and if it's decided the kid goes back, and mainly for the younger ones, but I'll send a team of pairs with that kid to the district just to hand the kid back off and make a smoother transition. And it works really well. A lot of our older kids, it's not necessary, especially our high schoolers. When they're ready to go back, then we basically just, once the decision is made, they're handed off to the district and they go on about their way and hopefully graduate high school. But that's the way we do it. It's really, really successful for us. Our biggest problem is we just don't have enough space. I'm in the process right now looking to try to build another facility around combining both of my schools back together under one roof, because that creates problems when you split your staff and you can't hire staff. And then I really have a desire to tie vocational education in with my kids, because my kids don't get the same opportunity as every other kid, right? If they apply to get into a vocational program somewhere, they just don't get there. So we're in the process of creating opportunities for those kids, and I think it'll really make a big difference. But that's the way we work. So it's truly a partnership with school districts. They're in my building constantly. It's a different feel. So I would assume it is. I don't know how facility schools work, but it's a different feel. They're welcome in the building constantly. They're in and out, checking on their kids, keeping contact with that kid, which is really important because outside of our severely autistic program, a lot of those kids, they're going to be with us a while, right? Because they need that constant BCBA support and things of that nature. But for us, the goal is to get that kid back to their home district, and it really works well with that partnership and with my member schools, and their people in and out of the building all the time, and just not placing a kid. That's another thing that's important. Don't place a kid and then forget that they're your kid, right? The goal is still to get them back to where they're supposed to be in their home districts. Happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Thank you. I'm also going to introduce someone else who is actually able to be on the panel. We're super lucky because he managed to find the time. So I wanted to introduce Dr. Marc Gomes, who is a principal who is in charge of running the 5 alternative schools in JeffCo. So if you could add him to the screen, I want to invite him as well. And if you could introduce yourself, that'd be great too.
I think Dr. Gomez is not at a place with a screen, but I know he's on the phone, so he can join the conversation at least.
Wait, I can see him. Wait, I think.
There he is.
Can you hear us?
Hello, everyone. Can you guys see me?
Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Marc Gomes. I am the AEC network principal for JeffCo. So I oversee Longview, Mount View, CLC, Arvada Empowerment, and Brady. I just moved to Colorado. I got here in April. I'm coming from New York City. I've worked in the Bronx, New York. And I've worked at Rikers Island, 1,400 inmates. Those are all my students, right? My first dissertation was the reasons why African-American males drop out of secondary school. I'm working on my second doctoral degree now from Harvard. So my experience is kind of maybe different, than other experiences. I'm looking forward to sharing kind of my perspective. If anyone has any questions for me, I guess.
Awesome, thank you. Well, I'll actually toss the question right over to you. What does the entry process or re-entry process look like for you all when you have students either transition from traditional schools or try to transition back to them?
Right. So one, we have to create environments for students to succeed. And one, it's not just capturing students and making them play catch up, because that's kind of what was happening before I got here. In JeffCo, it was certain schools were only offering seats for 11th and 12th graders, knowing that they're constantly playing catch up. Students become at risk in 3rd grade, right? So we have to figure out how to create schools to catch students earlier. The bad part is the students who are most referred for at-risk schools are students of color, Black and Hispanic students, right? So we have to figure out what that looks like and change instructional practices at traditional schools. And we know a lot of times students don't feel welcomed in their traditional schools. Why? Because the adults teaching them don't look like them. So the class that we have is when you go into different schools and school districts, and as a Black male, for example, in JeffCo, it's 146 schools, I'm only Black principal, right? So even when I speak at meetings, folks just don't want to hear it, right? Well, we know why, right? Because it makes them uncomfortable. However, then I have to read my resume to folks, right? And it's troubling because, the things that you need to hear, you don't want to hear. So it's more about skill versus will. So we have to listen to students on kind of what's going on. And the students that we have, that we get at Brady and Longview and Mountain View is because they were pushed out of school based off GPAs, or they were randomly expelled, right? And of course, at-risk students don't have advocates for them, right? So it's easy just to kick those kids out. Or students get admin get funky about it, and they kick students out after October count, right? So now students who need to be somewhere else, they're sitting there for 2 and 3 months, right? So these are things that folks don't want to talk about. So it's easy to figure out, well, we'll have them sit there, and then for October count, we'll keep them in our school, and we'll keep suspending them XYZ. I heard a comment in one of the panels where referrals were something like 62% less. Well, the reasons why is because the mandate was to stop suspending Black and brown kids, right? So when you're not putting those referrals in, it's going to look like they're going down, and they're not. However, we know in inner city, in New York City, in Baltimore, and DC, where I've worked, violent crimes are up, homicides are up, right? That's a reflection of where? School, because they're being pushed out. But I'm just saying, so we need to figure out what we're doing inside the school and not making data look good. When you're defunding the police, well, they defund education, they defund education every single year, right? So we need to really figure out kind of really what's going on inside the classroom. The goal is not to have at-risk schools. The goal should be to figure out what's going on at the traditional school, understand that everyone learns different, but why is it students who are being kicked out are Black and brown students?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that context. And I'm going to move over to James because I know that facility schools might be a little bit different. So what does that reentry process look like for you all?
Yeah, so I guess I would note too that just there's a lot of different types of facility school programs. One of them serves students with developmental delays and highly impacted by autism. There's other facility school programs that serve behavioral needs. So I guess just something to like clarify with that. But where I work, since we're working predominantly with students that have are highly impacted by autism or have developmental delays. First, we would definitely need like a diagnosis of autism at least, or even just like a diagnosis of an intellectual disability prior to being referred to our particular facility school program. And so that usually comes with like some sort of medical documentation or a reevaluation, but more consistently medical documentation. So within the IEP, when we're conducting an IEP meeting, there's this component that's really specific, but it says placement options considered. And so the rationale for that, at least like what I've inferred, it's like highly illegal to just be like, oh, you have dyslexia, we're going to send you to a facility school program, because that's not the least restrictive environment. It's taking away general education like inappropriately, or access to general education inappropriately, which I think was like kind of touching on what I forgot your name, I apologize, but the panelists I was saying before me. But I think for the reentry back into it, just kind of what was touched on earlier, we just have to do a lot of routine data collection. So that comes with just setting measurable goals at the IEP meeting to ensure that we could accurately measure progress and growth in those areas. And then once we're seeing like data to show that growth is occurring in those areas, we start looking at just systems of support to figure out like, is this growth leading to less support? A lot of times at our facility school program, every student has like a one-on-one support, which means every student has an adult they're working with at all times. And so it kind of, at our point, when we start to see this level of independence grow to where they don't need that level of dependence upon an adult for their day-to-day skills, and then on top of it, we see growth and goals, then we start to consult with districts to just look at the options of placing them back into a more traditional public education setting. And that just comes with a lot of other meetings with districts and a lot of observations to figure out really strategic transition plans just to ensure that things are successful. I don't know if that's consistent with every facility school, but at ours, that's what we do.
Thank you. And thank you for clarifying the differences between facility schools and also naming just the different alternative options, because I think the real purpose of this is really to gain a better understanding of what is out there. So I really appreciate that. And then my final question for all of you, before I open it up is really, what are the different misconceptions that people have about alternative schools and facility schools and different options? And I'm going to go with you first, Maureen.
I and my son came off the bus, so he's on the Zoom with me. I guess I was going to say, I think that I love hearing the micro level of the directors at these programs and administrators. I'm going to take it to a macro level because I work with the community, and the need is so much greater than the seats. And I think that there's a misperception that if you have a need, you'll find a placement. Well, I have friends who are waiting now 2 years to get into the Joshua School or another alternative placement. I mean, that's not uncommon. My son was pushed out of the schools because the schools didn't fit his needs. And I had a home community program for 4 years. There still wasn't a school appropriate. So what did I do? I founded a school. I started a micro school during the pandemic, and that's how I got involved with facility schools. It is a facility school now since I left as leadership, but I think it's just really important for people to realize that there is not this wonderful choice for anyone that doesn't fit into public schools. And homeschooling is growing, especially in our communities of color, because they're realizing that the social impacts of being in a public school is negative for a lot of our kids. And then, I should say traditional public school, but then we don't have enough alternative placement. So I think I just want to reframe the discussion to say that there's a whole dearth of options. And although it's wonderful when a student can get into one of these wonderful alternative school who we have directors and administrators here from today, my experience has been is that most of our kids are unwanted. Our kids with severe, significant disabilities are not wanted, and they don't fit into public school systems, and they don't fit into, there's not enough seats in the alternative system. So a lot of us end up homeschooling or community schooling or unschooling. So there's a great need, and there's a huge diversity of placements within the facility schools. And I'm happy that Real Life Colorado, which was my baby that I created for my son during COVID, is now a facility school, and hopefully they will grow and continue to serve. But we need many, many more. And we need to serve many corners of our community that are not served in public education.
Thank you. And thank you for naming that intense need for more of these spaces. I'm going to pass it over to you, Dr. Gomes. What would you say are misconceptions that people have?
Yeah, like, I mean, so we hear it a lot, like alternative schools dummy down the bar, right? And I kind of inherited something like that at one of my sites where students would take classes and the grades wouldn't show up on transcripts, or students would be given credit for attending FAFSA night. So some of those malpractices that were taking place, we have hired the bar now, and we have to make sure that our students are prepared for the real world. So just understanding that, because there may be some misconceptions on what the schools were, this is where we are now, and this is where we're going. We can set the bar high, and we will continue to set the bar high.
Thank you for that. And what about you, Pat? What misconceptions do people have?
I think it's always been a stigma, maybe, I don't know the correct term, around a special needs school or a facility school or a school like mine. We've spent a lot of time in the last 8 years of just trying to educate our parents, educate our school districts, that when the kid is sent to us and they wind up in my school, I have a ton of staff that truly believe that they're remediating that kid, they're helping the kid. I run 5 different programs within one building, different needs. So I don't think it exists as much anymore with the school. The parents, in order for any education to work, there has to be a partnership along with parents, guardians, things of that nature too. So we create an environment where the parents are welcome, they come in. We've kind of changed the perception of what at least our school is. And so like Maureen saying, there is waiting lists, and parents are not reluctant for their kid to be there now, because we have quality professionals that truly care about helping kids, and that's what we do, right? We have a common goal to try to get them back if that's the plan. We've created a safe environment, been lucky to hire some professionals that it's unbelievable what they do. To give you an idea, my school comes with about $300,000 worth of workman's comp claims a year. So, it's always it worries me when the day comes that I can't hire someone that wants to work with our kids. And we're getting close, right? I mean, when the biggest perk I can offer somebody is they can get their tail end kicked once or twice a day, that's not a very good perk. So we face those issues, but as far as a negative perception of my school, I think we've changed all that in the last 7 or 8 years now. And you just got good people that preaches the message that we're going to take care of your kids, keep them safe, and do the best we can for them. So
Thank you. And James, I'm gonna go to you to have the last word. What misconceptions do people have?
I feel like everyone else handled that pretty well. I could just say like a misunderstanding I had before joining a facility school program. So I've spent most of my career as a special education teacher. And I do want to just know facility schools are absolutely a special education setting. They're just like the most restrictive form of a special education setting. I think I just thought that with my understanding of education in mind, facility school programs would operate more traditionally like schools, and they don't. They're very highly individualized and a lot more clinical because it's just working on a whole different set of skills that are barriers to learning. And that's the reason why the students are there. Is these barriers to learning are preventing them from being able to access their learning. And the school districts don't have the appropriate service providers to help them with growing in those mitigating those barriers so that they can access the learning. And so I think that that was like a big misunderstanding for me, is just like thinking that facility schools kind of operated like more traditionally like a traditional school, when really it's like just almost entirely different. There's like overlap, of course, but it's just a very different type of setting that's a lot more clinical and individualized.
Thank you.
Did I say one more thing, Jamita?
Of course.
Probably as a longtime school superintendent before I went to the BOCES, I was part of the Pikes Peak BOCES. I was a superintendent within the BOCES. I didn't really understand the School of Excellence, right? And as a superintendent, was lucky enough to lead some highly successful, academically successful school districts in the state. But this is the most important work in my 30 years that I've done is working with these kids, because at the end of the day, and you know, I can walk down the hallway at 3:15 and all of my troops are balled up there in the office. We got the kids on the bus. You know, it's a spectacle just to get all the kids on the bus, and they're, you know, they're beat up and battered, and we just have to remind each other every day that they're still somebody's kid, and we need good people and more facilities to work with my kids. That's just the way it is. And so keep that in mind with anybody listening. It's great work, and I just wish we could hire more people and have more buildings where we could, you know, we could make a safe place and a good place for our kids to go, for sure.
Thank you for that. I'm going to thank everyone who was able to be on the panel today. Thank you so much for your insights and sharing your experiences. And also thank you to everyone who is listening. I am going to pass it back to Barrick as we move into the next section.
Thank you, Jamita. And we're getting close to wrap up time. What I do want to do is open it to the entire group to have any questions. And we've got that Jamboard still going. I'll drop some questions into the chat as well that we've got in there. And that is, do you have any questions for our guest speakers? What connections, if any, do you make to what you know regarding alternative placements within your district? And I think as much as any of this, we want to hear from the members of CSSI where you would like to see this conversation continue to go. We have really just started this to dig into the role of alternative placements and alternative schools. And we want to hear from the members of CSSI where you'd like to go and dig a little more deeply. So I'll leave it open to everybody before I start calling on folks to just lean in, whether you have questions for Wendy and Dr. Silva, or you've got questions for this panel that we just had about alternative placements, or if you'd like to offer suggestions for Sue, Evan, Jamita, Carrie, and me about where you'd like to see any of these conversations go. So before the teacher in me comes back out and I start calling on those of you hiding in the back row with your camera off, who wants to lean in and have some questions you want to talk about? Nate, please jump in.
I'll be brave. I hate to see people suffer waiting in silence. I've been in this for a really long time, and I love hearing this conversation because I've done both rural urban work. I think where we're at in Colorado right now is we're in a place where we really need to evaluate the whole spectrum of what we have available to support kids. And I'm thinking about our own alternative schools in our district. I worked at a facility school for many years, worked, in starting programs in rural areas. And I think where we're at in Colorado right now is we have this confluence of a real change in our environment around what the resources are out there for kids with really significant needs of all kinds. And I would love to see some way that we could have a group come together and look at the spectrum of those types of schools. Because in Colorado, we have charter schools, we have private schools, we have, public and private charters, we have the State Charter Institute, we have facility schools. But I think it was Maureen who, Maureen and I go way back, we both have kids with Down syndrome. But I think the challenge is we don't have anybody really looking at the spectrum of that, right? Of what we have available and what we don't have available and the constraints that are happening. And I'd love to see a group that comes together that really looks at what are the resources we need and what's the funding, because if we can't provide school districts with the funding to do this stuff, and as was mentioned earlier, to hire the staff, we're going to just continue spinning our wheels. And so if there is a way to promote some kind of group that can sit down and look at that, and I know CD does the facility school work, and there's a great alternative campus kind of group that gets together, but I don't remember any time when somebody sat down and really looked at that full spectrum of what we have in Colorado and says, do we really, how do we build the capacity for the needs that our students are showing us, and do that in a way that does get every kid to a post high school pathway. So that's what I would love to see. And I know that's a big task. We recently tried it with behavioral health in Colorado, and it's still a challenge figuring that out. But that would be my thought, is how do we have a group look at that whole continuum?
No, I appreciate you raising that, Nate. And you kind of, without knowing, gave me an opening to talk about where I think some of this group is going to be going in 2024. And that is to forming some smaller cohorts that can really dig in. I think on the case of what you're talking about, that's going to require a state level effort. But I think this group may have the expertise to put together a working group that can kind of scope out some of what needs to happen. So appreciate you raising that, and I may well circle back with you and some of the other folks here. See a couple of hands popping up. I'm going to go to Terry and then Frank and then Maureen. And I see Amy back on screen. If she wants to jump in, I'll come to you, but let's go Terry, Frank, and Maureen first.
All right, thanks so much. So I'm Terry Corlewis. I'm with Charter School Institute. I just want to underscore what Nate just said. So important that we have a sense of the schools that are out there. Where are they located? Who are they serving? And where are the needs? In the Denver area, if you talk to some of the kind of suburban superintendents, they talk about, do they have enough AECs to serve the population, their student population? How many students are actually going into Denver because they have a pretty high percentage of AEC campuses? We have two campuses. One is located in Aurora, New Legacy, serving pregnant and parenting teens, and New America, which is also in Aurora. But when I go out there and I talk to school leaders across our portfolio, across the state, the needs are changing. We always did have a need for high at-risk students, particularly in the high school years, but then the behavioral needs for K2 is significant. And, Pat's serving students that are pre-K through 12. And I think we have younger and younger students that have great needs. And we traditionally do not have AECs that are serving those younger students. And so I think we just really need to have a better sense of where are the needs, and let's go out and meet them.
Appreciate that, Terry. Frank, what are you thinking?
Thanks. I'll be clicking in. As I really heard today, and thank you so much for all of you panelists and what you're doing. But Pat spoke to it. I think everyone spoke to it, that this shortage of AAC schools or just schools, whether they're partnerships or whatever. So I'd really like to maybe dig in and start looking at how do we keep kids from needing to go to an alternative situation. So what resources would help in their regular education right now that would keep them, so we don't have this huge, massive wait list of 2 years. That's insane. And things like that to get kids the services they need. So kind of looking backwards is how do we try to keep kids from having to go to alternative placements by having the right resources in the schools they're at.
Sue, I'm hearing the third working group that we're going to be needing to pull together next year. Frank, great idea, and appreciate you naming, how do we stop that from stem that need? Maureen.
I agree with Frank and his points, which comes back to quality of tier 1 general education, which is failing because we have high turnover of teachers. And we keep talking about recruiting new teachers and setting up pipelines instead of retaining the teachers that we already have who have experience. So anyway, that's just my own little teacher hat on. I was just going to say, if this group does move forward in that, make sure you look at the facility school work group report, because we did do quite a good analysis of what facility schools offer and what is needed. And we had quite a bit of stakeholder engagement. We had a survey that was very well, we had a lot of respondents to it. So that's within that world of, and then I'd also say that the work group for the facility schools came out of legislation. So legislation equals funding for consultants like we have here today, so that you can do a work group and come up with a recommendation. And we do have, just for this session, so you'd have to work fast. We do have Senator Zenzinger as the chair of our JBC, who is a educator, and she supports, she's the one who got fully funded state level special education over 2 sessions. She got that reestablished. So, but yeah, I do think that there is a need to address why are we having the need for the alternative schools and how can we prevent that? I support that entirely, but take a look at that report. We worked really hard on it.
Yeah. No, thank you, Maureen. And one thing that we're all committed to is making sure that we leverage all of the good work. I think one of our biggest hopes is to be that nexus where we can pull those pieces together so we're not duplicating. And appreciate you mentioning Senator Zenzinger. I'm not going to, since she's not on the call, I'm not going to put her on the spot about bills, but Senator Zenzinger, Speaker McCluskey, Senator Lundeen, Senator Marchman have all been such amazing allies to education and to the work that this group in particular is doing. I can't not call on my friend Amy, Maureen, after you raised the teacher retention. And amid all of the challenges, Amy, that your educators are facing statewide, from feeling unsafe to everything they've gone through over the last 4 or 5 years, and in general, the strains on the profession. What thoughts do you have when we're talking about these alternative schools and the effect it has on educators and how we can better support educators across the spectrum in all of this?
Thanks, Barrick. And yeah, thank you for this conversation. And I'm really excited to hear that there's going to be a second, third, fourth, and maybe these work groups that will grow out of this, because I do think it's very connected to the overall issue of school safety, which, realms from many things. Interestingly enough, we were just reached out to by workers' comp, and this was raised earlier about the workers' comp issue, but about the increase in the number of workers' comp claims on teachers getting hurt to the level of, having workers' comp claims. And so, that shows us that there's an issue. We just did our all member survey, and nearly 40% said that they have been physically harmed by a student in the last school year. And what we want to come of this conversation is not to say that kids are bad and students are hurting teachers, but it's, to Frank's point, we need to look at the root causes of what's happening and what do we need to put in place. And the other thing that I would say really needs to be centered in this conversation, or at least from my belief and from CEA's belief, is that whatever we talk about as solutions, that we're not contributing or exacerbating the school to prison pipeline. And I would hope that we would not look at solutions that are, criminalizing, or like going back to the earlier conversation where we're, exacerbating kids in the judicial system, and, that has all kinds of impacts on students and families. So I think this is such a complex but critical issue. I mean, one of the things that we have seen over the years with alternative placements is when we went through the Great Recession and had, lots of budget cuts, we saw many districts had to, do away with their alternative placements, and they just have not come back. And, staffing, all the things that were brought up today. So I'm really grateful that we're all committed and engaged in this conversation. I agree that lots of great work has gone on. How can we, pull it together to really support students and educators? So really thank you, Barrick and team, for leading these conversations and keeping this work moving.
It really is our pleasure. When Sue and I got together and got the teams together last spring, we knew we needed to lean on everybody who is on this screen and has been over the last 8 or 9 months. So thank you, Amy. I'm going to wrap us up briefly and then hand it over to my co-conspirator, Sue, to close us out. I want to sincerely thank all of our panelists, all of our presenters, everybody here. We have such an amazing group of educators, BOCES directors, superintendents, a remarkable team at CDE, Colleen and Christina, who have been with us not just the last 9 months, but the last decade plus, as Sue and I have worked with them. Chris Harms, who now leads the newly created Office of School Safety. Previously, the School Safety Resource Center was her world, and all of you. Thank you so much. Our current plan, and I'm saying current because it may adjust based on what we're hearing from all of you. We are going to be releasing an interim report. We will be sending out a calendar invite for all of you to talk with us again in a couple of weeks to give us your feedback, your reactions. We're going to, as a team, huddle after this and really dig into what the first quarter needs to look like to pick up and continue to support the work that you all have helped us think through around things like trauma-informed practices in our lockdown drills, around supporting our educators, and now this topic, what that may look like. So we may bring some of that to you later this month. We will bring you the framework of the recommendations for your feedback. Right now, on behalf of the entire team, I want to extend our gratitude and turn it over to Sue to close us out.
Thanks, Barrick. I just have to say to each of you who contributed to the conversation today, as well as the panelists, I hope that you feel the traction and the momentum that you've built as a collective. It feels like we're getting closer and closer to having consensus around some work that needs to be done to navigate our system in ways that don't criminalize our kids and keep all kids safe. So, nobody said that was going to be an easy silver bullet or magic wand. And with all of your brains, we feel like we're going to come up with a third way and be able to make some recommendations to the state. And as Barrick noted, we will have work groups, we will have legislation, we will have ability to recommend trauma-informed providers. And we're just very grateful because none of this would be possible without your big brains and your big hearts. So thank you. And thanks for trusting us with your time. And we hope it was a good use of your time today. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all. We'll be in touch by email. Have a great evening.
Stay safe.